Do you want to make your own podcast? Spotify has a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. And this is the platform that I use because it makes it so simple to record and distribute your podcast all in one place using your cell phone. What you need to do is download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Hello, my name is Catherine Moore, social worker, mom, coffee lover, and founder of Social Workers Rise, where we inspire social workers to connect, expand their knowledge, and change more lives than they ever thought possible. I'm so excited you found my podcast. We will talk everything social work on every level from micro to macro. We will hear the stories of social workers who are doing big things, learn new skills, and most importantly, give you actionable steps to make a difference today. Let's go. Before we get started in this episode, I wanted to share a resource with you that I wish I knew about a long time ago. One that makes it easy to start a side business to generate more income so you stress less about your money, you're able to pay your student loans without worry, and you're able to afford those online shopping sprees. I see you, no judgment here, I am with you. And what's so great is that as social workers, we have so many powerful skill sets that other people want and need to learn from us. This is such an impactful way to continue making massive change in the world without spending a lot of extra time on this. So I personally use Kajabi to create my online course, and I absolutely love it. And right now, they're giving away free trials. So click the link in the show notes to get started on your side biz now. And with that, let's get into this episode. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Social Workers Rise. I'm so glad you are back. This week, we're going to be talking with Regina about her experience as an international social worker. So I was super excited to get comfy with her and just talk about what it was like going from Los Angeles over to Austria, where they speak primarily German. And she has no German experience and did not even know the language when she first got over there. So we talked about what that transition was like, what she wished she would have known, and she gives us tips on what we need to consider and research before we even start making a move to another country to practice social work and to try to save the world. Because if you go over there blind, it's just not going to work out very well, and it's going to be very, very difficult. So there are a lot of things that you need to know before you are going to become an international social worker. It was also interesting to hear her talk about the primary therapy modality that they use in Austria, which is going to be the Freudian theory, and her experiences working in a psychiatric hospital with other therapists who primarily come from a Freudian background. So that was super duper interesting, and I'm excited for you to learn more about. And also too, I had to ask her about what she does for her self-care to manage her stress levels working in these extremely stressful and trying jobs that she has. So with that said, let's get right into it. Hi, Regina. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm so excited to talk to you on the Social Workers Rise podcast. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so glad we found the time to do this. I'm glad it worked out.
Yes, definitely. what brought you to the field of social work to begin with?
Yeah, so I think everyone has that social work story. Why social work? And for me, I graduated from school and had something completely different planned. I had wanted to go to law school, but something just didn't feel right. And so I decided after I graduated to take a month off, and I saw an advertisement for a fellowship program in mental health. Through Mental Health America, Los Angeles. I think they still have it and offer it now. It's called Jumpstart. And so I decided to sign up and I was accepted. And they were basically teaching about mental health for entry level positions, but from recovery perspectives. And you had the opportunity then to do an internship and then also learn in class, about the recovery model and empowerment and all of these really wonderful things. And it was basically love at first practice. It felt so right. And I identified with it so much more than I had with my other classes in political science and all the things I had studied before. And I just thought I have to do this. I love this. And so that's how I got started. I was fortunate after that to get a job in the mental health field, working in a long-term care facility for people with severe persistent mental illnesses. And I saw so many wonderful social workers in action. And I was in a bachelor's level position at that time because I did have my bachelor's degree. And I just thought I have to get my master's and I have to be a social worker. I was in love with it. And so I've been in the field of mental health. It's been over almost 10 years now. And I'm still in the field of mental health. I still love it. And I still believe in those first recovery, principles that I first learned. So
Wow, that's amazing. I love that. Do you feel like your work as a mental health I don't know what you call it, but a mental health worker in a long-term care facility, that sounds like really, really hard work. Do you feel like that made you a better social worker?
absolutely, 100%. So, I mean, there was a lot of, crisis intervention. And one of the best things about it was a long-term care facility for people who were basically mandated to treatment. But they tried to take as best as they could, a recovery model approach. And for me, that just sold me even more. I mean, to see people that are in such difficult times in their lives and don't really have a say, most of their rights, these were all people that were under LPS conservatorship. And a lot of their rights had been taken away. So to still try to view that and find empowerment and find recovery in that, I learned so much from that. And then went on to be a psychiatric social worker there after I finished my master's. And it was, yeah, it's definitely difficult work, but it's also so rewarding. And I've just learned so much being in that setting. And then it allowed me, opened a lot of doors for me.
Yeah. So what is the recovery model if someone's not really familiar with that? Can you just like explain quickly what it is?
Yeah, so the recovery model is basically, it was actually developed by consumers in the field of mental health for other consumers of mental health services. And it's basically the basic idea is that clients should be the ones driving their services. They should be involved. The social worker or whoever else is coming in, whatever other mental health expert that's coming in, shouldn't be the people that are kind of dictating the terms of treatment. That should come from the client. And the goal is then it's not about what I think recovery looks like. It's about what what recovery to the client means. So what are their goals? How do they want to achieve them? And seeing then how I can kind of help guide them to get to where they want to go. Um, and I just think it's a really powerful, it's really about a lot, about empowerment, about not focusing on someone's diagnosis, but focusing on the strengths that they bring. And just so many things that align with what social work is about. So
Yes, yes, that's awesome. Did you ever find that clients were kind of thrown off by the recovery model? Like they wanted you to tell them what to do?
absolutely. I think that's probably one of the hardest things, especially in, long-term care settings where people have so much experience in, mental health settings, and they're used to just being told what to do, told what medication to take, told, that this is how it's going to look. And all of a sudden you have someone coming in asking, but what do you want? And that definitely sometimes throws people for a loop. And I think also, it takes time. It takes time to develop that relationship and let them know that you are authentic and really wanting to know what they want to do and what their goals look like. But I think if you give it time, then it does work. I'm a really big believer in that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I remember I haven't worked with people who have severe mental illness before, but I remember in our grad school, because we went to grad school together at Cal State Long Beach, and oh my gosh, it must have been part of a class. We went and toured an agency that I believe was practicing recovery model, and it was difficult to find who was a client and who was a clinician because the clients had the same, I don't want to say the same power, but there was no offices and it was
Exactly.
just a community room where the clinicians, they had a computer, but the clients could sit at the desk too, and they could walk around too. They used the same bathrooms, they ate in the
Yeah.
same dining room, and it
Yeah.
was a very interesting model.
Yeah, I mean that is exactly that's recovery in action where there is none of this kind of power over idea. And I think for some people it's just a really wonderful thing. I think for others it takes time to get adjusted to that. And I think also sadly in the world we live in, I just don't think it's always realistic in every single setting. And I can talk about that a little bit because of what I see here. I'm in Austria right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the models here are just very, very different. And I sometimes have to try and bring that recovery side in. That's just kind of in me from my earlier practice. And I don't know if it's always so well received, but I think that's also part of our work as social workers, is to sometimes bring in that other perspective that isn't always around.
Yes. So in our previous conversation, you mentioned that over in Austria, it's very psychodynamic theory, like Freudian um, theory. So can you talk a little bit about the between doing the recovery model and doing and working with colleagues who are very Freudian, and how was that transition? That sounds like from one extreme to the other.
I don't think I was prepared for that. I don't think I'm still prepared for that. I was just trained differently. And I think in grad school now things are taught a little bit differently. Of course, Freudian analysis is taught and talked about in grad school, and we learn all of these different theories. But to see people here really still so focused on that, and that's, really, I would say one of the main, um, you know, therapy techniques that are used here and therapy schools that are followed here, and seeing that in practice in an acute. So I'm also working in a psychiatric setting right now, and I'm on an acute unit and also in a partial hospitalization program. And just seeing how they apply that there, and seeing how they analyze and discuss cases through, a Freudian perspective, and how they analyze psychosis through that. And sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, so
And
so for people who also aren't maybe as familiar with Freudian analysis, like how does that differ? Because I feel almost like the recovery model and strengths based is just in my culture, in myself. So
yeah.
it's fascinating to me to hear different perspectives. So how is that different over there?
So there's a lot, of really focusing on developing and talking about what happened in the childhood. Couch, like, right, like if you think of traditional, what we learn, in school, people laying on the couch, and dream analysis, all of those things are still practiced. So at least that's how I see it here in
So
Austria.
they really lay on
And
the couch and
they really lay on the couch. And the idea behind that is that the therapist, the client should not see the therapist's face at all, and they shouldn't be able to see and read any type of emotion from the therapist, because then that can impact negatively then the therapeutic intervention. So that's the idea behind that. Um, yeah, so the idea is more about really developing and seeing what happened in the childhood, seeing what kind of negative things happened. And I don't want to be stereotypical, but also it's kind of talking about why it's the mom's fault a little bit, what was wrong in the childhood, even when there wasn't necessarily trauma or things like that involved per se. So it's just a little bit different.
mm-hmm.
And not every therapist here uses that technique. There are people that also use, more humanistic theories or, systems theories. it's just something that I hadn't encountered before in my work in the mental health field in Los Angeles, where I was living before. And all of a sudden to come here and see that in practice and talk about, dream analysis and things was a little bit foreign to me.
So for people like me who have these fantasies of international social work and like going to another culture and diving deep and just, helping people, what from your perspective, like what are things that you have learned and things that maybe threw you off a little bit, or like tips for people who might be considering moving to another country and practicing social work in another country?
Yeah, so I think I forgot to say, I am working as a social worker right now, but I am working in German. And before I moved to Austria, I did not speak any German at all.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah. So, the first thing I would recommend is making sure that the language is something that you have a hold of. For some people who grew up, bilingual, trilingual, that might come easier. I unfortunately grew up speaking only English, so I didn't have that as an advantage. And I really just took time the first year and a half here to focus just on the language because it's so important, especially in our field, to not only be able to speak the language and understand, because it's, a competence and ethics kind of thing. You need to make sure that you're understanding and being able to accurately assess the situation with a client. But, you know, there's also these cultural things that are a little bit different, and these different ways and phrases and things like that. So learning the culture, I would say, is probably also equally important. Um, Wherever somebody's going to go, because of course it's going to differ from, American culture or wherever someone else is from. And I think just giving yourself the time to do that, if you have the time, and planning that in to your move, is something I would recommend, and something that really helped me.
Smart. Okay. So you mentioned that you spent about a year and a half getting used to the language and the culture. Do you feel like that was a good amount of time? Like, would you recommend that to someone if they're new to a specific culture?
I don't think you'll ever be ready completely, but I think as far as being able to truly get an idea of what life looks like and understanding, and then, being able to take that and trust yourself enough to say, okay, I can do this. I think a year and a half is okay. Everyone's learning curve is going to look differently. But that time frame worked for me. And again, I was really, really focused and determined. I was so scared that I would never be able to practice social work if I didn't master the German language. So for me, I just was so set on that, and that was really my goal. And it meant, at home, my husband, who was Austrian, only speaking German, for example. And it meant, spending a lot of time studying the language and watching TV or hearing podcasts that were not in English. So I think I can't, overstate that piece of the language and the culture is just really important. And for everyone, that's going to look different. So I think everyone should also just go at their own pace.
Yes.
And when they feel like it's time, even maybe a little bit before you feel like it's time, because like I said, I don't know if you'll ever feel completely ready when you're completely starting in a new language and culture.
hmm I love that because it helps to put in perspective that something that you hop on an airplane and go to another country and get a job and do, right? It takes a lot of planning, a lot of investment, a lot of time to do that. So, um, yeah, that's really, really great.
Yeah, and the other thing is that every single country, I mean, even I'm in Austria, and Austria is a German speaking country. Germany is a German speaking country. Switzerland, there are parts that speak German. And despite that, the laws regarding, for example, regulation of the social work field look completely different. So I recommend, especially anywhere you go, doing research regarding the laws and how your diploma can be recognized in that country and all of the things you need to do, because that part of it is also something that takes some time.
hmm Yeah, because that's a whole nother piece of it. What are the requirements to do therapy? Where you're going? Are they going to honor your social work degree? Are you going to take more classes? And I imagine all of those things could be another investment too.
Absolutely. I think that's also not to forget is these things, especially when you think about the fact that if you're planning to move, but you don't know the language yet, it's not an English speaking country, for example, for people that speak English, that costs money. I did have to visit German courses and those, I wasn't working and those definitely cost. So I think just kind of thinking about that and factoring in, it is also really important.
Definitely, definitely. I'm just over here taking notes. So far, what I have is if you're considering international social work, find a way to become fluent in the language. We need this to be competent and ethical social workers, and I think even to uphold integrity too of our
Absolutely.
roles. Become culturally competent in wherever you're going, and then research the laws around the therapy and social work degrees and how to practice and any additional training or courses that you might need to take, and then factor in the time and the cost for all of these things.
Yeah. So, I can give you a concrete example, talking about therapy. The field of social work here in Austria has no law that governs the field. And the field that they're called psychotherapists here, or psychotherapeut or therapeuten. And there is a law that governs that, and it's completely separate from social work. So sometimes you can get certain classes accredited, and they'll say, okay, good, you may not have to do the whole thing. But if I want to do formal therapy here and be on the therapist list, because there's a list, I have to probably do about another 7 years of training.
Wow.
And they only have, I think it's 18 or 20 therapeutic methods that are recognized, and you have to pick one formal school and stick with that. So, that's completely different to how we do it, for example, in the US. And, I can do things as a social worker, like offering, certain types of services, but that therapy piece, I cannot formally practice here yet as a therapist.
Oh, interesting.
So, that was a little bit of, that was hard because this is something that, I was going through my licensing process before I left the US as well. And then all of a sudden to not be able to do and practice the same way, that was really difficult at first when I actually, after I had gotten the job and was working here, and to recognize that was really hard. So I think that's another thing to recognize is sometimes you may not be able to do the things that you were necessarily trained to do. And, you may have to do more training on top of that.
Yeah. So ultimately have realistic expectations of what you're getting yourself into.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So right now you are you're in an acute psychiatric setting. Is that right?
Yes, so I divide my time. I'm on the acute unit. I'm in a hospital working on the acute psychiatric unit. And then I'm also part-time in the partial hospitalization program. And I'm also a lecturer at the local university here. So I do lectures for English for social work, which works perfectly for me, for first year students. And then I'm also teaching clinical social work.
Oh my gosh, Regina, you are so busy.
I needed it after the year and almost 2 years of not working. I was like ready to just go. I needed to be busy again.
Yes, yes. Those are all really high stress environments. Well, I don't know about being a professor, so much high stress, but being in a psychiatric setting, a lot of times I hear from people that it's very high stress. They have trouble not bringing the work home with them. How do you not get burnt out, or how do you, keep that balance between work and life?
I think that's actually something that the Austrian people do really well. And I've seen that in my work here. When I was working in the US, I felt like I always was I could never turn off. Even when I was somewhere else, I was becoming to visit. He's my husband now, but my then, boyfriend, fiance. I would be in Austria and I would have, I would be texting my coworkers still in the US because I was still just so nervous. And I always felt like I had to be involved in something and could never just completely shut off. But they're really good about dividing that time here. And when I leave the office, I really leave the office. And I think that's also just something that everyone should learn as much as possible to do if it's realistic in your field. Sometimes we have, we're on call and that just doesn't work. But if you can, really turning off, and when I leave, I really just shut off that part of it. I have to compartmentalize, because if not, that's how you get burnt out, like you said. So for me, that looks like leaving my work phone at work when I leave, which is definitely part of the culture here. And then focusing on things, that bring me joy, talking to my family, talking to my friends at home. I think that's another thing to not forget when someone's moving. It sounds really fun and really glamorous living in a new country, but it's hard. It's hard to not always be around people that speak your language, especially when you're first learning the language. It's hard to not be able to do the things you were initially trained to do in, for example. And there are days that, it's extra hard, I think, being an international social worker. So I think sometimes those self-care things really then take priority. So, exercise, for example, or just spending time with my husband, remembering why I moved to Austria in the first place.
Yes.
That's kind of what keeps me grounded.
Yes, that's so important. And I feel like you touched on being away from your friends and family, and I think that the loneliness part is something that people forget about because it's real. I mean, you're in a completely different culture. You're away from everything that's comfortable, everything that you know. And if you're not, luckily you have your husband there to support you and love you, but if someone's just up and leaving by themselves with minimal support system, it sounds like you'd be very high risk for loneliness and being homesick.
Absolutely. And I think there's something to recognize. I don't know, when people are thinking about international social work, you hope that maybe first you have a job. I didn't move for my job, I moved for my husband. But if you're moving for your job too, I think the other thing that I didn't think about is every culture also works differently. And in the US, my coworkers were also some of my closest friends, and I just really valued that. And here it's a little bit different. The people really try to leave their work at work. And that means your work colleagues are more often than not your work colleagues, and your friends are people outside of that. So they really try to differentiate that. And when I first started, that was also very new to me.
Yes.
So
it sounds like their boundaries are super good, like super on point.
Actually, yeah, that's a very strengths-based way of looking at it. Yeah, absolutely. That's true. They have very good boundaries with that.
I'm all about the strengths-based perspective. You give me anything, I will twist it into a strength.
That's a great skill to have.
That's awesome. So you gave us some really, really amazing insights and some tips. Is there anything else that you feel it's important for someone to know before they start, looking into international social work or even move over there?
I do want to say something related to the expectations regarding payment, because I think that's important, and something that we don't talk enough about often in the social work field is about paying and being paid fairly, but also recognizing that overseas that might look differently than what we're used to in the US. Believe it or not, although I feel like sometimes we as social workers in the US don't feel like we're always paid enough, in other countries that's sometimes even worse. Again, because of the lack of professionalization of the field, it's just newer. And I think just being aware of that as well is something to consider before people move. And also related to, for example, the European Union, there are specific laws that favor people who are European citizens as opposed to their country nationals. And so it's going to be very difficult without a previous, previously being allowed to work here to start and enter the job market. So again, I really can't emphasize enough, checking the laws of the country where you want to go, seeing how that works out, seeing what the payment looks like and how that relates to, the social work field. Because you can have a master's, you can have, your license, but if you move someplace else and you all of a sudden, that's not recognized anymore, then you're going to be looking at a lower pay scale, and you have to see if that's in the end worth it for you.
That makes sense. And also to take into consideration the salary that you would be looking at getting paid, and then how much is housing and living and, transportation and all of those things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Regina. Where can people find you or get in contact with you?
Gosh, I have a LinkedIn, so they can contact me on there. Regina Scheitel is my name, Scheitel, the last name, the spelling. Or you can always also write me an email, also the same, reginascheitel@gmail.com. And I'm available for questions, specifically if people have them related to social work in Austria or the German-speaking countries.
Great. Thank you so much, Regina. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Catherine. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for hanging out with me on Social Workers Rise. If you are looking to add another stream of income while making massive impact on the world, then I highly recommend creating your own online course. I personally use Kajabi and highly recommend it. They make it super easy to turn what you know into what you do. Click the link in the show notes to get started today. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Social Workers Rise. If you loved it, write a review and give us 5 stars wherever you listen to your podcast. This just helps other people just like you find us and join our community. Also, I would love to connect with you on Instagram. You can find me at Social Workers Rise. I can't wait to see you next week. Bye.